Welcome everyone to today's webinar on creativity in RE. And as I said just before we get started, we are recording the session, but don't worry because you can't be seen or heard. That's just to reassure you. And also, if you have any questions as we go through, please feel free to type them in the chat and we will address them at the end if you have any queries at all. My name's Selina, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we go through the next slides. We also have Nicola and Georgia here, who are also going to be giving loads of useful information on creativity in RE. So we're really pleased you could join us this afternoon. So whether you're an RE lead, a class teacher, or a school leader with responsibility for RE, or an advisor, we hope today gives you something practical and inspiring to take back to your classrooms. And you don't need to be an RE expert to teach it creatively. That's exactly what this is about. We'll be exploring what creativity in RE actually looks like in practice, from EYFS right through to Key Stage 2, and how you can enrich what you are already doing. So a bit about me. My name's Selina Sullivan. I've got 20 years of teaching experience working across both faith and community schools with pupils from a wide range of backgrounds. And for 10 years, I was an RE lead. I delivered RE training to ECTs, sat on Diocesan Working Party for RE. I've also held roles as SENCO, Assistant Head and Geography Lead. And now I am a regional advisor for Jigsaw Education Group, and my area is the Northwest, and I really love enjoying supporting the schools. So over to Nicola, I think, next.
Thank you, Selina. As Selina said, I'm Nicola. I'm the regional advisor for Jigsaw for the East of England, and I also cover parts of London and more recently parts of the South East as well. I need to update this slide actually because it's almost verging on 30 years now that I've been a
Oh,
primary school teacher,
well done.
and I still actually do work 2 days a week in a primary school alongside this role. I've had over 8 years now as an RE subject lead, and I've had various different positions over the course of my career, including being on SLT, whole school curriculum leads, and various other subjects. And as well as that, I'm also qualified as a mindfulness teacher and a forest school leader. So I shall pass you over now to introduce you to Georgia.
Thanks, Nicola. So, hi everyone, I'm Georgia, the regional advisor for South East and London at Jigsaw. So, I was a primary school teacher for over 8 years, and I've worked in a range of community and faith schools with pupils from diverse backgrounds. I was the RE and collective worship lead for 6 years, and am an early years RE and art subject specialist. And I was also selected to be part of a working party for a scheme of work of RE run by my local diocese as well. Perfect. So today, our session today, we want to show and explain what creativity in RE means. We want to highlight the benefits to all children, explore what it looks like in the different phases. So we will give examples of how you can use this in classroom as well, and reflect on how Jigsaw RE promotes creativity. So to begin, we want to share feedback we received from a recent poll in the Jigsaw RE Community Facebook group. We asked 2 questions, as you can see here on the slide. The first question, which of these aspects of creativity do you currently use when teaching RE? The results were quite interesting, as you can see, with most members clicking every aspect, but the largest percentage of votes were for spiritual development, for example, mindfulness. So I think this links really well to the Jigsaw ethos. We encourage mindfulness, pause points, and calm me time within teaching, and spirituality is a key part of teaching RE, which is what we will talk about later in the webinar as well. We then asked, which of these aspects of creativity do you feel you need more support with when teaching RE? So as you can see, some members clicked on expressive arts, for example, drama and music, but the aspect most voted for was artifacts. So in today's webinar, we will be sharing examples from all of these aspects of creativity, which we hope will support you in your planning and your confidence with teaching RE.
Well, thanks, Georgia. That's really wonderful. So let's start with why creativity matters at all. The central idea on this slide is that that creativity gives children multiple ways to think, express, and belong in the RE classroom. The phrase think, express and belong is worth thinking about for a little moment. So RE asks children to engage with big, sometimes quite challenging ideas about meaning and belief. And not all children can do that through just writing alone. So creative approaches opens more doors for them. So Ken Robinson famously said, creativity is as important as literacy. And he was arguing that the narrowing of the education to focus only on, say, academic subjects risk squeezing out exactly the kinds of thinking RE most needs to nurture. Loris Malaguzzi, founder of the Reggio Emilia approach, said, the child has 100 languages, meaning children express and make sense of their world in many different ways. And our job is to offer as many of those languages as we can. And Einstein's point about play reminds us that curiosity and creativity are deeply connected. The best RE lessons often feel like genuine exploration rather than just pure instruction. So when we talk about creativity in RE, we're really saying, let's give the children different ways in to think, let's give them different ways to express and understand the beliefs that they come across, and give them different ways to look at big questions. So on the next slide, what do we mean by creativity, especially in RE? And it's important to clarify this because creativity isn't just about making something pretty. It's a lot more deep than that. So we're going to talk about three interconnected things. First, creative thinking, the ability to question, imagine, and interpret. This is about the quality of the thought, not necessarily like a written output. Second is creative expression, using a range of media to show understanding. This includes art, drama, music, movement, digital tools, and writing. And third, creative meaning, making personal connections between beliefs, experiences, and ideas. This is where RE becomes truly meaningful for children. So creativity is as much about how children think as what they produce. So keep that in mind as we go through today's session. I think, Nicola, it's over to you next.
Thank you. So if we just refer back to the quotes from earlier that Selena just mentioned, so Ken Robinson, who told us that creativity is as important as literacy, and Loris, who reminded us that children have 100 languages for expressing their ideas. I think we can safely suggest that if there's any subject where those ideas come alive, it's RE. Because RE is full of big questions, it's more important that our children have more than one doorway into that. All learners need options, they need to feel successful, and they need ways to show their thinking that are not all tied to writing. On this slide, you can see our creativity bank showing 4 simple practical pathways we can use in the RE classroom to help children express understanding in ways that feel natural to them. And actually, none of the pathways on the slide will be new or surprise you, but hopefully it's a good prompt or reminder for when planning your RE inquiries. So why does creativity matter in RE? It supports a deeper understanding so that children grasp concepts by doing, not just reading. It develops empathy and perspective, nurtures spiritual development such as wondering, questioning, and personal meaning, and creates multiple opportunities for all children to engage, including children with SND and children who find written tasks difficult. It also builds oracy and critical thinking. And just a couple of quotes here that I thought would be quite nice to share. Creativity honours the 100 languages, especially for learners who think differently, communicate differently, or need alternative routes into big ideas. Think of a child in your class who lights up when given a creative task. This is where RE can reach everyone. Over to you, Georgia.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Nicola. So creativity is the natural language of spiritual development. So it's useful to remember that both Ofsted and the Science Framework value spiritual development. So creativity and spirituality are part of the overall education of a child and also one aspect of RE's purpose, to allow pupils to know about what spirituality means and create experiences that are spiritual. So we should not underestimate the power of RE for spiritual development for all pupils. They can experience moments of awe, wonder, and meaning making. It is important to create space for this where children can wonder without judgment and know that their emotional responses are valued. For example, you might want to take your class on a spiritual walk around your school grounds or local area where you ask the children to stay quiet and focus on listening to the sounds around them. You might ask them to lay down and look at the clouds, talk about what they can see, or even share using their senses, what they can see, hear, touch, and smell. This allows the children to be present and allows time for those calm moments. So on this slide, you will see a suggested framework for creativity in RE, which in turn makes the learning experiences inclusive for all pupils. The framework considers how pupils might encounter, experience, and express their learning. It includes story, oracy, sensory experiences, creativity, and lived experience, which form a powerful spine that makes RE accessible, engaging, and meaningful for every learner. Encounter is about that very first moment where children meet a new concept in RE. This stage is about capturing attention and opening up curiosity. It sets the tone for deeper exploration later and ensures that children begin their learning journey with a sense of wonder. The experience stage is where children move from curiosity into active exploration. This is the moment when the learning becomes hands-on, sensory, and memorable. It allows the children to explore religious ideas through doing and feeling, which leads to deeper understanding and richer conversations later in the lesson. And finally, the express stage is where the children take everything they've encountered and experienced and turned it into their own creative response. It is about giving the children ownership of their learning. It allows them to show what the concept means to them in their own voice and through their own creativity. So this is where RE becomes memorable, personal, and deeply engaging.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to spend a moment looking about oracy, starting with vocabulary. And this is fundamental to everything else in RE. As you know, RE has a heavy vocabulary load with many tier 3 words like salvation, covenant, nirvana, mitzvot, for example. And these need to be explicitly taught, not just encountered briefly. So the strategies on this slide that I'm sure you are familiar with are tried and tested approaches for embedding vocabulary deeply. Targeting vocabulary using the tiered model helps you to prioritize. So you may have many, many words and you really need to focus in on what's going to really help children to understand those more difficult concepts. So tier 1 words are the everyday words that pupils will know. For example, the term happy. Tier 2 words are academic, but more cross-curricular. For example, rescue. Tier 3 words are subject-specific and need most attention. So if they understand the terms save and rescue, then they can begin to understand the tier 3 word salvation. Building that bridge between tiers is how we make complex concepts accessible. That bridge can be done through discussing children's own experience of being forgiven or saved, or through a story, for example. The Freya model, which you can see on the slide an example of, asks the children to pick a word and then define it, draw it, find synonyms, find antonyms, find examples of that word, and find non-examples of that word. And that's excellent again for tier 3 RE vocabulary. Other ways in is dual coding. So you have the word with visuals. You can have triple coding with visuals and actions to help all learners, particularly those with SEND or EAL, to access and retain vocabulary. Word mats and banks should be available and actively used. So we must try not to just laminate them and leave them to one side. That must be something that the children interact with all the time and can have the dual coding on it too. On the next slide, we're going to take a little a deeper look at oracy in terms of classroom discussion and feedback. So we're moving on how to capture and share children's responses. So not every pupil, as you know, will feel confident putting their hand up or speaking in front of the class. And also, RE is full of questions that don't necessarily have a single right answer, which is why you need this discussion. Managing discussion well is quite a skill. So these strategies offer multiple ways for pupils to share their thinking. For example, you can do it verbally, in writing, through drawing, through gesture, or through collaborative building of ideas. So, for example, we quite often use the whiteboard responses, and they can be written or drawn. And this gives everyone a chance to respond simultaneously and allows you to see what the children are thinking before sharing aloud. And children can easily edit and build on their ideas using the whiteboards. Post-it note responses collected centrally are great for building a class view of a question and can be sorted and discussed. And snowball recording, which is one of my favourites, is a lovely collaborative technique. So one person or group records a response, then it moves around for others to add questions or comments to. And I want to give you an example of that I've used it literally too. So I've had each child has a piece of paper and they write down what it is that the teacher wants them to do. They scrunch it up literally into a ball, a snowball, and only on the teacher's command the pupils throw their snowball. And on the next teacher command, the pupils safely take a different snowball, unscrunch it, add a different idea, scrunch and throw again on the teacher's command, and so on. And of course, this needs to be managed very carefully and expectations of behaviour made clear. And you probably need a really good relationship with your class because we don't want to overexcite them with some of these activities. But it is a really good way of retrieving knowledge and getting an overall assessment of what the children know or what their thoughts are at the beginning of an inquiry, for example. The teacher as magpie is a technique where you circulate, pick up interesting ideas and share them with the class. And you can pre-warn a child that you'll be sharing their idea, which will boost their confidence, but also they've sort of affirmed that they're happy for that to happen. And I really like the no hands up and random name selection. And you can use lollipop sticks or whatever is appropriate. You might have an interactive tool on your whiteboard. And this ensures broader participation, but always give the right to pass and offer thinking time. And then physical responses, so that all children can be included. Those that maybe find it difficult to speak out loud in front of the class, they can do facial expressions or gestures or freeze frames. And they're quick and they're inclusive and they're fun. Just my notes are stuck for some reason. Bear with. And now it's over to you, Nicola.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So we're going to now take a look at artifacts, which obviously at the beginning we saw was one of the areas that people required the most support with. So artifacts are a really powerful way to make religious education more engaging, more meaningful and memorable for pupils. By bringing real objects into the classroom, we can really help the children connect to abstract beliefs and practices and to something tangible and relatable. When people see and handle an object, whether it's a menorah, a prayer mat, a cross, a diva lamp, or even a simple photograph, they naturally begin to ask questions. This curiosity creates a rich starting point for inquiry-based learning. Artifacts spark imagination, invite wonder, and encourage children to explore meaning rather than simply receive information. To get the most out of artifacts, it's important to move beyond simply just showing them and to ask open-ended questions such as what might this be used for, why might it be important, who might use it, and how might it make someone feel, and perhaps what story might this belong to. These questions help the pupils dig deeper, make connections, and develop empathy and understanding. However, modelling respect is essential to show the pupils how to handle things carefully and explain why these objects matter to the people that use them. This builds a classroom culture of sensitivity and appreciation for the different beliefs and practices. Artifacts also work beautifully as prompts for creative responses. Children can sketch them, write a story from the object's perspective, act out how it might be used in worship, or design their own symbolic objects inspired by what they've learned. These activities help pupils connect emotionally and imaginatively with different faith traditions. And finally, always link the artifact back to lived experience, both the experiences of believers and the children's own lives. Ask questions like, what objects are special in your home? Or how do we show respect for things that matter to us? This helps pupils make meaningful connections and deepens their understanding of the role of symbols in human life. Using artefacts supports all learners, especially those who benefit from a hands-on and visual approach. It makes RE accessible, inclusive, and creative for everyone in the classroom, transforming lessons into experiences that pupils remember long after they leave the room. So the encounter, experience, and express model discussed earlier gives us a really simple but powerful structure for exploring artefacts in RE. Each stage deepens pupils' engagement and helps them move from curiosity to understanding and to creative meaning making. So in the encounter stage, we introduce the artifact as a mystery object. We don't name it or explain it straight away, and that's deliberate. This moment is all about noticing, wondering, and predicting. When pupils don't yet know what the object is, their curiosity switches on. We use open-ended questions like, what do you notice? What might this be used for? To draw them into the inquiry. Excuse me. This sets the tone for learning that is exploratory rather than teacher-led. In the experience stage, pupils get to interact with the artifact more fully. They might handle it, observe it, or explore its sensory qualities, perhaps the texture, the weight, sound, or movement. This is where we connect the object to lived practice. Who uses this, when, and why? We invite imaginative thinking too. What story might this object belong to? This stage helps pupils move beyond surface-level description and begin to understand the artifact in context as something meaningful to real people. Then, moving on to the express stage, pupils respond creatively. This could be through drawing, writing, drama, design, or discussion, whatever helps them express what they've discovered. Here they connect the artifact's meaning to values, identity, or community. They reflect on what the object represents without imitating religious practice. We capture their learning through sketches, notes, or shared reflections. This final stage turns inquiry into understanding and helps people internalize the deeper significance of the artifact. So together, these three stages transform artifact work from show and tell into rich, meaningful RE. Pupils begin with curiosity, move into thoughtful exploration, and finish by expressing their own understanding. It's a model that supports creativity, empathy, and deep learning, and it works beautifully across all primary age groups. So this is one practical way of putting multisensory and creative learning into action using artifacts. So an engagement station is simply a dedicated area or a set of resources that stays in the classroom for the duration of an inquiry, ready to be used flexibly. It provides a range of objects, stories, and activities linked to the key learning from the inquiry. The idea is that pupils can engage with and return to concrete sensory experiences to build and reinforce their understanding. It will contain the things that you would be using in the lessons, so that it's not an extra resource that you have to plan for. And it should be used in a flexible and adaptive way. It can be used with the whole class, with small groups, or individually. And teachers and TAs can dip into it at different points to introduce or revisit concepts. The Easter example on the slide gives you a sense of what might this contain. So, for example, story bags, artifacts, picture sequences, perhaps small word figures. And as you can see, they're all connected to the inquiry's key learning. I personally would add to it as you work through the inquiry, so not putting everything on there at the start. It reinforces the learning and creates anticipation and curiosity about what might be added next. It's also a great prompt for recall and can be referred to during lessons or even, outside of lessons. For pupils who have barriers to learning, the engagement station gives the pupil, with or without support, a way to flexibly weave RE learning into that provision. It keeps the pupil connected to the same learning as the rest of the class, rather than being separated from it. The beauty of this is its simplicity, and it doesn't require huge preparation, just thoughtful resourcing linked to your inquiry. Okay, back to you, Selena.
Thank you. So one of the most important aspects of teaching, particularly religious traditions, is stories. And it's a really powerful tool in the RE Teacher's Toolkit. And most religious traditions have their sacred stories at the heart. And engaging children with those stories thoughtfully is a creative act in itself, I think. So when planning storytelling in RE, it helps if you think across the 4 dimensions that are listed on the slide. So first of all, when you need to think about your environment. So where are you going to be when you tell this story? Are you going to be sitting in a circle? Are you going to dim the lights? Would you be outside? Will you be laying out a story cloth? All of these things can create a very different atmosphere from rather than just the children sitting at their desks and you just reading the story to them. It signals that this moment matters. Then you need to think about your materials. What props or images or artifacts will you use? Even a simple candle can change the feel of a story. For the storytelling itself, really think about the following. How will you hook the children in? How will you use your voice, your pace, and your gesture? How will you model respect of the tradition the story comes from? This matters as we're not performing for entertainment, we're actually mediating a sacred narrative in most cases. Stories are seen as a doorway into deeper thinking, and personally, I think it's great if you could memorize the story, make it and simplify it a bit, as it models being present in the story, because there's no book, you're not faffing with pages, and you don't need to show pictures. And we'll have a bit more on how you can, do this storytelling. And finally, the response. What do we remember? What do we want the children to know? How will we gather their ideas? This might be talk, drawing, movement, or sculpting. It might be building or simple reflection. The key is that the story does not just happen to them, that they get to process it and make meaning from it, and that they feel part of it. And for learners with SEND in particular, story is invaluable. It offers multiple modes of processing. It's a slower pacing. It's got concrete engagement with abstract concepts and a hook that can be revisited. So we'll have a little bit more now on story and how you can develop that.
Thank you, Selena. So the impact on the children, of using story bags and the slow-paced storytelling is quite profound. There is something about opening the bag and taking out the objects for the story without comment that really engages them. So story bags are usually fabric bags that contain the objects and instructions for retelling stories with a multisensory approach. They can be put together quite easily, and you can see an example of this on the screen. It is important to ensure that all religions and worldviews are covered equally and that you are respectful. So, for example, when we are working with Islamic stories, we need to be really mindful about not including images of representations of Allah or the prophets. That means that our story bags must use objects, fabrics, landscapes, symbols, but never faces or figures. And that is not a limitation. It is actually a brilliant opportunity to think creatively about how to convey the meaning without relying on images. It is the same principle across the board. So questions you should ask yourself are, what does respect look like in this tradition? What is appropriate? What is not? And how do we make sure that our practice reflects that? So story bags can work for non-religious worldviews too, especially when explaining the concept. For example, in ethical veganism, in order to convey the concept of compassion to all living things, a simple story can easily achieve this. So when we use story bags thoughtfully across all the worldviews we teach, we are not just making RE more engaging, we are modeling respect, we are removing barriers, and we are giving every child a way into the story. So RE is full of abstract concepts such as salvation, dharma, justice, incarnation, etc. And multisensory approaches help ground these in concrete encounters, making them more accessible and engaging for all learners. So the research behind this is strong. A multisensory approach can enhance memory retention, deepen understanding of complex concepts, reduce cognitive overload, improve engagement, and support emotional and social development. That is a powerful combination, particularly for a subject like RE, where we are often asking pupils to engage with big, unfamiliar ideas. So think about what this looks like in practice. For example, handling artifacts, using music or soundscapes, tasting food linked to religious celebrations, creating art in response to a story, or using drama and movement to explore a concept physically. So for more in-depth and practical ideas on this, we do actually have a multi-sensory approaches in RE webinar. And this goes into much more detail on how to embed these strategies across your RE curriculum. So we are now going to look and share some practical examples for each phase in the primary curriculum, starting with the early years. So if we think about the early learning goals that we can link with RE, we would look at people, culture and communities, where children are expected to know similarities and differences between different religions and cultural communities in the country, drawing on their experiences and what has been read in class. They are also expected to explain similarities and differences between life in this country and life in other countries. So to begin, let's look at the encounter part of the creative framework. And here are some adult-led activities and examples to spark curiosity and engage the children in their learning. For example, you might have a story bag, a mystery box, a visitor to your classroom, a sound hook, a movement activity, an image or art hook, a scent or sensation hook, or a special table. The planning for early years within Jigsaw RE gives a lot of great ideas for adult-led activities and allows for these moments of curiosity. So this is also where you could be writing down children's responses to the encounters, taking pictures to refer back to, and really building that excitement and engagement within their learning. So if we have a look now at the experience part of the creative framework, here are some activities for continuous provision for the children to recreate what they have seen, heard and experienced in active exploration. So for example, you could have an RE table with objects from your adult-led activity, a sensory tray, a role play corner with clothes to dress up in, small world figures and story prompts, artifact exploration stations with magnifying glasses, taste or smell exploration such as dates or sweet pastries for Eid, bread and grape juice for harvest, apple dipped in honey for Rosh Hashanah, or even a music station for the children to sit and listen or dance to. So there are many activities within the Jigsaw RE planning for early years, and there are many suggestions for different areas of your continuous provision in the setting as well, and how you can encourage that active exploration to continue the learning. So next we have the express, which in early years would be the creative responses for the children to show their learning in their own way. So as an art specialist myself, I wouldn't be expecting the same result from each child. And I very much encourage that individuality and less of the everyone create the same result. So these activities are where you can encourage that individuality and the children can create something that is their own unique response to their learning. So these examples include creating or painting their own piece of worship art, place of worship art, planting seeds linked to creation and care for the world. So the children draw or label what they hope will grow and why caring for things matters. Prayer hands, stained glass windows using tissue paper, festival celebration creations such as Diwali Diva lamps out of clay, Rangoli patterns with coloured rice, designing henna patterns, Ramadan lanterns or prayer mats, or Star of David sun catchers, for example. And finally, creating religion or worldview symbols using different creative mediums. So lastly, some key teaching tips for creativity in early years. It is strongest when children are given time to explore and experience. It is important to help encourage the children to develop their own curiosity and creativity. And here is an example lesson that I've actually taught in reception during Easter. So as the encounter lesson, you could have 2 story bags, one to tell the story of Holy Week and the other to tell the story of Good Friday and Easter Sunday. You could have a visit from a reverend from a local church, for example, and share the Easter story, role play the story and answer any questions the children might have. For the experience, the children could taste hot cross buns, visit their local church during Holy Week, and within continuous provision, you could have an Easter garden sensory tray with the tombstone, role play outfits, and small world figures to recreate the Easter story as well. And then finally, for the express, the children could create palm crosses for Palm Sunday and stained glass window crosses with tissue paper as flowers. And they could also draw their own responses to the Easter story as part of an extended writing activity as well. I'm now going to pass you over to Nicola, who will talk through the examples for Key Stage 1.
Thanks, Georgia. So, as George has just beautifully put, in EYFS, the children learn through exploration, through play, sensory experiences, and carefully guided adult interactions. At this stage, their understanding is built by touching, seeing, and experiencing the world around them. However, as children move into Key Stage 1, we begin to gently shift that approach. The focus becomes more structured, with a greater emphasis on purposeful thinking and intentional questioning. This is where a key progression happens. Children start to move beyond simply experiencing objects and begin to think more deeply about them. They're encouraged to explore meaning and significance. Instead of just encountering something new, they begin to ask important questions. Why is this important? Who uses it? And what does it show about belief? And this shift lays the foundation for deeper understanding and help children to make the connections and develop more thoughtful and reflective perspectives. So if we have a look at the encounter, experience and express model again, this is what it would look like in Key Stage 1. So at the encounter stage, children move beyond guessing and start organising what they see. They sort artefacts, match objects to religions, and begin to justify their ideas. And this marks a shift from simple exploration into early inquiry. We now name artefacts explicitly, introduce key religious vocabulary, and help the children make connections between ideas. Activities become more focused, for example, matching artefacts to religions, sorting objects by their use, or annotating simple images. These experiences build early disciplinary thinking in RE and help children move from noticing to thinking like young inquirers. At the experience stage, in EYFS, the children learn through the play and sensory exploration, and they understand the world by touching and trying and experiencing things directly. But as we move into Key Stage 1, this foundation develops. The focus shifts towards understanding purpose and making simple connections and beginning to explain meaning. Children move from taking part in an activity to thinking about why it happens. They might sequence how a prayer mat is used, link a Diva lamp to the story of Diwali, or explain why an object is special. And this marks a key transition from I used it to I understand why it is used. In EYFS, children experience, and in Key Stage 1, children begin to understand meaning. They start linking artifacts to beliefs and stories, explaining why practices happen, and recognising lived experience. Instead of simply lighting a Diva lamp, they begin to understand that it represents light over darkness. This shift helps children move from participation to genuine understanding. And now at the express stage, in EYFS, it's centred on creative response. Children share ideas through making, creating and talking in open-ended, imaginative ways. As they move into Key Stage 1, we build on this by encouraging clearer communication, simple reasoning and early connections. Children are still creating, but now they're beginning to explain their thinking. They might talk about their artwork, write a short sentence about its meaning, compare artifacts, or discuss what is special to them and others. And this marks a shift from expressing ideas to explaining ideas. In EYFS, the children express through creating, and in Key Stage 1, they begin to explain meaning, showing early reasoning and making simple comparisons. For example, they might explain a role-play scenario, describe why something matters, or compare religious and non-religious practices. The key development is moving from creating alone to using their creations to communicate understanding. So, have I just skipped through? Hold on one second. We're at the
Oh, you're
express.
okay. Yep.
We're-
Now you're on the example lesson.
Yeah, sorry. I
That's
thought I'd
okay.
skipped one then. So let's bring this all together with a practical Key Stage 1 example. So this lesson uses all the components, the encounter, experience and express, and we use it through exploring a mezuzah, which is a special object found in Jewish homes. So you begin by showing a mezuzah and inviting curiosity from the children, asking simple questions such as, what do you think this is? What might it be used for? Where might you find it? and then show a Jewish doorway and ask pupils to match the object to its place, introducing the key vocabulary like mezuzah and Jewish. And here pupils are identifying and noticing and beginning to connect ideas. At the experience stage, we explain that the mezuzah is fixed to a doorway and contains a small scroll. Contains a small scroll with an important Jewish prayer, and this reminds Jewish people of their beliefs. You might show a short clip or demonstrate how it's touched when entering or leaving the home, and this opens discussion about why it matters and how it might make someone feel. Pupils move from knowing what the object is to understanding why it is important. So at the express stage, the children then create and reflect. They might design their own mezuzah case or complete sentences such as "this is special because," or talk about something special in their own home. We encourage simple reasoning using because and help them to link ideas to their own experiences. And this is the final shift from creating to explaining meaning through what they create. This kind of lesson brings together curiosity, understanding, and expression, supporting children as they take their first steps into deeper religious thinking. Okay, now Selena's going to talk you through what this looks like with Key Stage 2.
Yeah. So the encounter stage in Key Stage 2 should deepen considerably. Artifact inquiry, for example, should become more analytical. For example, pupils may investigate artifacts like puja tray, seder plate, or prayer beads, and you ask them to raise questions themselves. Perhaps they write them on sticky notes, which could be done individually, could be in pairs or groups, and ask the pupils to consider, as we've stated before, what it is and what it might be used for, and who might use it and why, and what does this show about their beliefs. So I'm not going to go through all the examples on there, but there is a particular one about text analysis that I'll go into a bit more detail. So the example that I have is Jesus's parable of the lost son, forgiving father, or as it's known, the prodigal son as well. So in order to create curiosity, I quite often didn't reveal the learning objective because obviously that's a massive clue to the lesson content and a curiosity spoiler. So in this example, to begin with, I showed Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son painting without telling them what it's called. This creates curiosity even before you tell the story. Next, ask the children to write ideas or questions on sticky notes about that painting. Now you move on to tell the story in the ways suggested, like the use of story bags that we talked about before. And following the telling of the story, pupils can show their response to the parable by using thinking frames. Now, there are many thinking frames out there, so I've got a couple here, and they're really useful for unpicking a story. So they've encountered the story, and now they're going to look at it in more detail, but they're still encountering it at this stage. So the example given is Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. You can see on the screen there's different coloured hats there on the worksheet. The beauty of this approach is that children can note their feelings first. So they listen to the story. How do they feel about it? What's their response? That's the red hat thinking. Then they use white hat thinking and list the facts. What were the facts in that story? And after that, they use their black hat thinking, which is what's negative about that particular parable or story, and what are the positives in the story, and that's your yellow hat thinking. Essentially, this enables children to use their comprehension skills of initial emotional response, their literal fact-finding, and followed by some not so deep inference, just initial inference. And once this is completed, pupils can move on to think about the meaning in more detail, and that will be the green hat, which is a deeper inference, if you like. And the blue hat is really about metacognition, thinking about their thinking, and not all these hats need to be used in one given lesson, and you don't need to use them all at all. It just depends what your focus is. And as an alternative to the thinking hats, there's a picture of the affinity diagram on there. So, and you can use this to unpick a parable as well. Might be more useful in lower Key Stage 2. And the children note down the people that are in this, or the characters that are in the story, then the actions that are taken in the story, and the things or the materials and the objects that are in the story, and then thinking about the theme or the moral or the idea in the stories. And again, this can be done individually, pairs, groups, and even as a whole class. And if you do it in a group, you can assign different roles as well, just to make it a bit more engaging. Somebody can be the scribe, somebody can read the story again, and so on. So once they're familiar with the story, show the painting again and ask the children to return to their original ideas and responses and questions and add to it. So they might notice which part of the story it is. Now that they're familiar with it, they can look at the picture and think, I know when that happened. And I think that person is this person and that person. And hopefully, once discussing it, they'll bring out a deeper understanding of the theme and the meaning of the parable. So that's just one example of the encounter. So on the next slide, we'll move on to the experience part in Key Stage 2. And this is about interpretation and connection. Pupils now explore deeper meanings and symbolism. They understand diversity within worldviews, connect beliefs to real-life decisions. You can see the list on the screen, but I'll highlight 2 of the points. So interpreting symbolism. They can explore the meanings behind these symbols and rituals and actions and ask, what does this represent? And this goes deeper than just saying, that's that symbol. It's more theological and philosophical in their understanding, knowing what that symbol actually means. Secondly, linking belief to practice. How do beliefs influence actions and choices? And this is a central RE question, especially at Key Stage 2. So here are some real life examples. The image on the slide is of the Humanist Climate Action Group, and it's from a Jigsaw RE unit that explores how a humanist worldview influences choices about lifestyle and environmental responsibility. It is a great example of lived experience in action. Other examples I have are, in Islam, pupils explore the facts about how Muslims pray, but go further to show how prayer, excuse me, my notes have gone funny again, links to submission and discipline. In ethical veganism, they see how the beliefs affect food and lifestyle choices. And in Sikhi, they understand how the belief in equality is shown in Langar. So there is a progression from understanding a meaning, going towards interpreting and connecting that meaning. And then finally, the express part in Key Stage 2. Children are asked to justify their ideas and reflect on the meaning of what they have learned in a far deeper way. So from year 3 to 6, whatever form of expression pupils choose, be it art, song or writing, we want to build on their ability to explain, as Nicola pointed out in Key Stage 1, and move them towards justifying and evaluating. So for example, with a thematic question like, how and why do people show their care for the earth? Pupils could write a pledge on a footprint cutout, drawing on the carbon footprint concept, alongside ideas like the Buddhist call to tread lightly or the Dharmic principle of ahimsa. Or they could create a board game as shown on the slide. Either way, the key expectation is reasoned responses. The creative form is not the endpoint itself, it's the reasoning behind it and whether it's expressed through art or debate. So the examples on the slide, one of them is our family footprint, sustainability reflection, and a Hindu deity poetry frame. And they show how creative tasks can bring together the substantive RE content and the personal expression, and using their disciplinary knowledge, be it theological or philosophical or around the human sciences. So on the next slide, I have an example question lesson. And it is a great example of a Key Stage 2 lesson that uses creativity to explore ethics and worldviews. So the inquiry is, how do inspirational vegans impact how people might live today? In the encounter part of the lesson, the children are given picture clues. They look at the images and really look at them and try to guess who the person is and what they do. And this creates intrigue and curiosity. In the experience part, they are asked to look at art created by Sarah Secchi, who is a young Italian vegan artist who uses her work to raise awareness about the relationship between humans and animals. It is a rich and thought-provoking encounter with lived experience. Discussion prompts could be, should we care for all living things? Do animals feel? Are some animals more deserving of life than others? And these really get the children to think deeply. And then in the express part of the lesson, the children are asked to create a piece of art about compassion for all living things, showing the beliefs of vegans, such as the belief about compassion to all living things, or the belief that maybe they should speak out against cruelty. They need to have a title which sums up the message of the artwork and makes viewers think about their choices, and write a reasoned description to go alongside it. And of course, you can use this format for other worldviews and lessons. But this example connects the worldview content around vegan ethics, animal rights, and compassion with a genuine creative response and a personal reflection too. So I think it's you now, Nicola.
Yeah. So just to kind of put that all together so that you can really see the progressive approach to creativity in RE using that encounter, experience and express model. So you can see on the screen that in EYFS the children are exploring the world through play, sensory engagement and curiosity, and the focus there is on noticing, experiencing and expressing in open-ended ways. And then moving into Key Stage 2, we begin to introduce more structure. So the children start to use vocabulary, make simple connections, explain their thinking, and shift from exploring to understanding meaning. And then by Key Stage 2, pupils are working more like young theologians and philosophers, investigating and questioning, interpreting meaning, and justifying their ideas with reasons. So across all the phases, the structure stays the same. They encounter, they experience, and they express, but the depth of thinking increases. And that's what ensures progression and not just activity. Back to you, Selena.
Yeah, so we just thought we'd put in a few other examples that might be useful for you to take away and use more or less straight away. So it shows some other graphic organizers, thinking frames, and creative tools. You'll see on the top right there a sort of a rectangular table, if you like. It's called a fortune grid, and this is quite useful in Key Stage 1. And you can use emoticon faces, pictures, or words to track characters' feelings at the beginning and the middle and the end of a story. And it's brilliant for developing empathy and narrative comprehension. So again, the parable of the lost son is a great one there. That's the example on there. How did the sons feel at the beginning? How did they feel in the middle? And how did they feel at the end, etc. And it really helps them to understand the story at a deep level. You will also see the five senses organizer. It looks a bit like a fishbone. And again, this is lovely for EYFS or Key Stage 1. And it encourages multi-sensory description and helps them to put on paper, basically, those experiences they might have had. What could they hear, smell, taste, or touch, depending on what the religious concept or practice is that they are learning about. And for Key Stage 2, I've got an example of exit tickets in various formats. And there's a pyramid model shown there with, it'll say something like, things I learned today, things I was reminded of, and a question I have. And this is a quick and flexible way to capture learning. It can be handed into the teacher, and it's a quick assessment tool. And it's not too onerous on the children either. And then on the right there, you can see the concentric circles diagram. So if you're exploring a belief or a story or, you know, a faith story in particular, you can look at it and ask them to think, well, what's at the heart of that story? And then what's really important, what's significant, and really what's on the edge, you know, the bits we don't really need to know about, they're just part of the story, but, you know, the target map, what is at the centre of it, and what does it really mean? So they're just other ways in that make it more interesting for the children to get their ideas down and express their thinking. Thank you, Nicola.
So just to kind of put this into context in terms of Jigsaw RE and the resources that we provide, and really show how this encounter experience express model is already present in the planning that we produce. So firstly, each Jigsaw RE inquiry follows a four-step inquiry model. across a 6-week half term. And this structure aligns really closely with the Encounter, Experience and Express approach. So in step 1, which is sorry, I've just moved the slides along, didn't mean to do that. In step 1, which is lesson 1 of your 6 lessons, the children encounter the inquiry question from their own perspective. They draw on their prior knowledge, experiences and ideas, and they're beginning their learning journey within their own worldview. In step 2 of the 4-step inquiry model, we look at lessons 2 to 4. And this is where the children move across the conceptual bridge into the worldview that's being studied. And this is where they develop the substantive knowledge and the disciplinary skills needed to explore the inquiry question in more depth. This stage reflects the experience phase as pupils engage with beliefs, practices, and lived experiences beyond their own. And then finally, in steps 3 and 4, which are our lessons 5 and 6, the children express their understanding. So in lesson 5, they demonstrate what they've learned through an assessment task, and lesson 6, they reflect on how their thinking has developed. And this completes the journey, moving from their own worldview into another and back again to consider how their own ideas have changed and in a more informed way. So that's sort of like an overview of the inquiry as a whole. But now if we look more closely at the actual structure of individual lessons, we can see the same pattern repeated. So the opening elements of a jigsaw lesson, such as the connect activity, our questions, our visual hooks, and open my mind sections, all align with the encounter phase. These are designed to spark curiosity, encourage questioning, and activate prior knowledge. This is also the perfect point to introduce creative RE strategies that we've discussed in this webinar, such as using a mystery artifact, a story prop, a short soundscape, or a striking image. And these approaches deepen the curiosity and make this first encounter more sensory and engaging. The main teaching input, the tell me or show me, aligns with the experience phase. And here the children engage more deeply with new knowledge, stories, concepts, and explore ideas through discussion and interaction. This stage can also be enriched through the creative approaches discussed today, such as sensory stations, role play, guided imagination, or collaborative building, allowing children to step into the learning in a more embodied and memorable way. And then the final parts of the lesson, the let me learn and help me reflect, focus on the reflection and response, aligning with their express phase. Children share what they've understood, how their thinking has developed, and what the learning means to them. And this can be supported through creative responses such as artwork, freeze frames, symbolic making, movement, or simple reflective writing, giving all pupils a meaningful way to express their understanding. So when we consider both the overall inquiry design and the individual lesson structure, it's clear that Jigsaw RE naturally follows this encounter, experience and express model at every level. What the creative approaches do that we've discussed today is deepen each stage, making the learning more inclusive, more imaginative, and more engaging for all learners. And the best part is that you don't have to rewrite your jigsaw plans. You simply enrich them with creative elements that fit naturally into the existing structure. Back to you, Selena.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. So going forward, it makes sense to reflect on your practice. And I know this is something teachers do all the time. We're the worst for it, really. But yeah, I think it's important to consider a few questions in relation to perhaps your next RE unit or even your next lesson. So what aspects of Creativity Bank are you already using? And is there anything you could add? Where in your existing plans could you enrich the encounter stage with a creative hook? Something to create that sense of mystery or wonder right at the start? And how are you offering multiple pathways for children to express their understanding? Is there more than one way in through art, drama, writing? And are you creating enough space for spiritual development, that wondering, that noticing, silence? These moments need to be planned for. But as Nicola says, most of it's already in there. You just need to add some bits if you use Jigsaw RE. And what artifacts could you introduce in your next unit? And how will you structure this encounter, experience and express model around them. Hopefully you've got some fresh ideas from today's webinar. And remember, as Nicola said, you don't need to rewrite your plans, just enrich them. And children can interpret the meaning personally and connect learning to real life feelings and experience through using this creative approach.
Okay,
Thank
back
you.
to you, Georgia, to finish up.
Thank you. So we have now reached the end of the webinar. So thank you all for joining us. We hope that you found this useful and you can take away lots of different creative ideas for you to use within your RE lessons. So I don't believe there are any questions in the chat, so I'm taking that as a good sign. But one common question that we get asked is how to evidence creative responses in children's books or learning journals. So there are many ways that you can do this from early years up to year 6. But examples work with any sort of creative activity that you do. For example, you could take photos of the children's work, and in the older years, that it's a great way for them to evaluate and assess their own learning and respond to it underneath. You might take photos and then write what the children's quotes are in the younger years, if you have a floor book, for example, and photographing and videoing any activity that you do, for example, class debates or the creative activities using artifacts. It's really great if you have an online learning platform to put those on there as well and have that as your evidence. But you don't always have to have evidence, but you can add the children's self-assessments or responses to their learning to it as well. And I'm sure the ladies would agree that if there's anything else you might want to mention, Nicola or Selena.
No, just if there are any questions, then do feel free to get in touch with either myself, Georgia, or Selena. Our emails are on the first few slides at the beginning, and obviously all of these slides and a takeaway document will be sent to you for registering and taking part in this webinar today. If you can't get hold of us, you can see on the screen now there's a school support email, telephone number and website that you can find out more information or come to us for any support or questions that you may have. So
thank you. I have nothing else to add. That's brilliant. Thank you, ladies. So thank
Thank
you
you very
ever
much.
so much, everybody. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thank you.